The Torah speaks of Earth as the focal point of creation, a world designed with us at its heart. But today, most of us accept a different story, that the Earth revolves around the sun. Science, it seems, has moved on. This is Faith Meets Fact.
The Torah tells us that there is a geocentric model, that the Earth is at the center and that the sun goes around it. What does science really say? The truth is that a long time ago, scientists used to believe that the Earth was at the center and that the sun went around it. Later on, science graduated to an understanding of heliocentrism, where the sun is at the center and the Earth and all of the other planets go around it.
Now, there are numerous examples that show that the Torah supports geocentrism, and Maimonides, in his book covering all of Jewish law, codifies it. He writes the following: all of these spheres that surrounded the world are circular. Earth hangs in the middle. Seems pretty unequivocal. How do we reconcile this? Let's now turn to Rabbi Yechiel Krish, a leading expert on all things science and Torah, to take us through some possible reconciliation.
When we have these sorts of science-Torah problems, one approach is to twist the Torah. For example, we could say that although the Torah tells us that the Earth is at the center and that the sun goes around it, that's a Torah that is speaking to people who live here on planet Earth. Obviously, the Torah was given to the Jewish people on this planet, and when we look up at the sky, we see the sun and the moon and the stars and all of the planets circling around us, and the Torah is not trying to give me some astronomical truth, it's trying to tell me what I might see. The problem with that approach is the same as the problem with any approach that twists science and Torah. It starts from a basic assumption that is flawed. It starts from the assumption that science is certain about something and Torah is not necessarily certain about something. The fact is the opposite. Science is the collection of evidence, so science never claims certainty. Torah is the literal word of God and claims certainty. If Torah is claiming certainty and science is claiming that it has collected evidence that contradicts our certainty, our first approach probably shouldn't be to twist the Torah into a knot. Another possibility when it comes to twisting the Torah is to simply reject Maimonides, the Talmud, and instead embrace a literal reading of the Torah. The Torah itself, in its actual verses, never tells us specifically that the Earth is at the center and that the sun goes around it. So we could say that when the Rambam says this and when the Talmud says this, these are reflecting the science of the time and shouldn't be taken too literally. That, on the surface, is an appealing approach. The problem is we're going to use nuances in the language of Maimonides and in the language of the Talmud to decide life and death matters. We take every single word of these books incredibly seriously in Jewish law. To suddenly say that an entire section of the Talmud, an entire section of Maimonides, is to be disregarded completely, is to cast doubt on the veracity of the entire book. And once we're doing that, we, God forbid, have lost the oral Torah itself. Another possibility is to twist the science. We have evidence that the sun is at the center and that the Earth goes around it. That evidence appears to be pretty strong, but you know what? We are Torah Jews who follow the Torah and have lived by the Torah for generations. One approach that the Jewish people can authentically take is that science has no right to tell me that my Torah is wrong, and that if we wait long enough, eventually science will come around and discover that the Torah is true. The problem with this approach is that it requires rejecting science, essentially, and that's something that we generally don't like to do. The Torah relies on science, the Torah respects science, and rejecting science out of hand, while sometimes it may be necessary in order to preserve the integrity of the Torah, we only do it when we absolutely must. And then there's the Kabbalah approach, the Jewish mysticism approach. We could say that when Rambam, Maimonides, is speaking about the Earth being at the center and multiple spheres of different planets and stars surrounding the Earth, he's speaking about some Kabbalistic value, some mystical value, and perhaps the Talmud is too. And while that approach may be appealing, we do need a literal understanding of the Torah in addition to a mystical one. There must be a literal way to understand the Talmud and a literal way to understand Rambam. It also is difficult to imagine that two law books are speaking in Kabbalistic terms and aren't meant to be understood in their literal sense. So the Kabbalistic argument is not deeply compelling in this particular instance. A fourth approach, and one championed by the Lubavitcher Rebbe, is an approach of synthesis when trying to resolve apparent conflicts between science and Torah. In this model, the science, as long as we understand it properly, and the Torah, as long as we understand it properly, won't contradict because they're both reflecting the truth as it is best understood through those individual lenses. Although it's true that scientists used to believe that the Earth was at the center of the solar system and then updated their point of view to reflect the sun being at the center of the solar system, in the early 1900s, the scientific view changed entirely and most people didn't notice. With the introduction of special relativity, Einstein demonstrated that it is impossible when you are within a frame of reference to tell when two objects are both moving, which one is moving relative to the other. This is a slightly complicated concept, so I'm going to offer an illustration that might help us understand it a little bit better. Imagine two ships at sea, and the sea is completely calm, and there's no stars in the sky, everything's completely dark, there's no wind, there's no way to tell whether your ship is moving at all or whether the other ship is moving at all. There's a light on the other ship. I see that light coming closer to me. As I see that light approaching me, there are two possibilities. Really, three possibilities. One possibility is that that ship is coming toward me. Another possibility is that I'm coming toward the ship. And a third possibility is that we're both moving toward each other. It's possible that any of these scenarios are playing out because if I don't have an external frame of reference, like the motion of the waves against my ship, or the stars in the sky, or a light on the shore to tell me where I am in space, my motion is entirely relative. I cannot tell whether I'm moving or whether the other ship is moving. The key takeaway is that motion is always relative, so no single observer's viewpoint is more correct or privileged. Similarly, when two bodies in space are in motion relative to each other, as the Earth and the Sun are, their positions have no absolute significance in a strict relativistic sense. It's one of those quirks, and in our case, gifts, of relativity. Even if you were to step outside the solar system and observe the Sun and Earth in motion, the way you describe their motion would still depend on your chosen reference frame. There is no privileged God's eye view. It's like asking, what's the true center of a map of the world? There's no privileged center point, just conventional center points that make calculations easier. That's actually why physicists still prefer the heliocentric model, not because it's absolutely true that the sun is at the center, but because the math is cleaner that way. The geocentric model is, to be fair, unwieldy for most applications. But that doesn't mean that it's wrong. It's important to note that this does not mean that the Torah perspective is that either is possibly true. The Torah is very clear, Rambam is very clear, the Talmud is very clear, that the earth is at the center and that the sun goes around it. But if you were to ask a scientist who understands special relativity, which model is true, the geocentric model or the heliocentric model, a scientist would tell you that there's no absolute significance to either term anymore. It's now a matter of mathematical and modeling convenience, no longer enshrined as absolute truth. And you don't have to take my word for it, you can take Hans Reichenbach's word for it. Hans Reichenbach was regarded as the greatest empiricist of the 20th century, which is quite a title. He was hired to the University of Berlin by no less than Einstein and Max Planck themselves, two people who regarded his work very highly. When he started studying Einstein's special relativity, something that he noticed very quickly and published about repeatedly is that under special relativity, we no longer know if the geocentric model or the heliocentric model is correct. In his words, quote, "The relativity theory of dynamics is not a purely academic matter, for it upsets the Copernican worldview. It is meaningless to speak of a difference in truth claims of the theories of Copernicus and Ptolemy. The two conceptions are equivalent descriptions. The theory of relativity does not say that the conception of Ptolemy is correct, rather it contests the absolute significance of either theory." Although this point of view hasn't made it into the scientific mainstream, and may not have been in your science textbooks growing up, it has been around for almost 100 years, and it certainly does reflect one of these strange realities of special relativity, because in Reichenbach's words, it is meaningless to speak of a difference in truth claims. Therefore, the authentic scientific opinion on geocentrism for nearly a century has been, well, no opinion at all. So it's no longer a question of Torah versus science. We don't need to twist the Torah, we don't need to twist the science, and we don't need to turn to Kabbalah for an answer to this question. It's all a matter of synthesis. The Torah clearly tells us that the earth is at the center. The science clearly tells us that there's no absolute significance to either model, geocentrism or heliocentrism. And if there's no absolute significance to either model, why not align yourself with the Torah's frame of reference?
Wow, thank you, Rabbi Krish. As always, when presented with any discrepancy, it's always important to remember that the Torah speaks of definitive and eternal truths, while science is humankind's best effort to figure things out with the evidence we have available. If you found this interesting, don't forget to leave a comment, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next video. Next time we'll discuss what the Torah has to say about life on other planets. Do aliens exist? If so, what does that mean for us down here? Believe me, you don't want to miss it. Thanks for watching Faith Meets Fact.